Okay, good. Good to go.
All right, guys. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's 3 prakim. Rambam, Hilchos Kelim, prakim, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, and Yud Dalet. Beginning with Perek Yud Beis. So we mentioned yesterday for the first time concerning klei matches or klei mateches, metal utensils. The example that Rambam gave yesterday was regarding a knife that was tamei, then it got dull, can't use it anymore for its function, tahar. When you resharpen it, it's not only that it's a keli going forwforward, but chazra tuma hayishana, the old tuma goes back. What we're going to learn in this chapter primarily will be, it's not only in the case of a knife that got dulled, Shades, it didn't really break. No, a rule by all klei matches that when it breaks, no matter how much it broke, if you reconstitute that keli, always midrabanan chazra tuma hayishana. And the Rambam is going to make it clear that this concept is only by metal to the exclusion of all other kelim. And B'chlal, as we go through the Rambam and Hilchos Kelim, we constantly will be noticing that you can say that metal utensils are the most susceptible to tuma over all other kelim. We will also have in Perek Yud Beis some halachas regarding glassware and their unique halacha. And by the way, we learned already in the beginning that glassware to begin with is only tamei midrabanan because it comes from sand, it comes from the earth. So it's similar to klei cheres, even though we learned it's not fully similar to klei cheres. Perek Yud Beis has 18 halachas, beginning with halacha aleph. Says the Rambam, klei eitz, klei oid, klei etzem, shenishberu. As we keep on learning, now that they broke, however that's defined above, to hadam mitumasan, the tuma, even if they were tuma, it automatically goes away. And now, of chazar v'asa kli nishivreim, if you take the broken shards, you take the broken parts, and you reconstitute it into a keli, whether you remake it into what it used to be, or you take the broken parts and you make it into a new type of keli, regardless. Well, now that you have a new keli, of course, like any other keli, it's susceptible to being tamei, but it's tar until it becomes tamei. Now, klei matros, a metal utensil that broke after it became tamei, so far it's equal to all the other types of kelim that now that it's broken, it is now pure, meaning the broken parts are pure. But here is where metal is different from all others. Hiticham means you melt it. And you make them into other kelim, even if you make them into a new type of kelim. Here, chazru latuma hayishana. Wow! I just remember. By the way, we did speak about it. Remember, we were mentioning it a couple of, maybe I think it was last week. We got it correct. This is one of the Shmoina Asar Davar that's discussed in the Sugya of Shabbos, right? That whole Shmoina Asar Davar that happened in the Aliyah of Hananiah ben Chizkiah ben Gurion. That there were more Talmidei Beis Shammai over Talmidei Beis Hillel. So this is one of the 18 decrees, and as we'll see, it's a derabanan, and it's regarding metalware. And the ein leklei matchis tohara gemura ad sheyabilam b'mikvah kishehem shleimim. Then a taka remains pure. I took it to the mikvah, or yisha'aru shaburem. If the parts remain broken, something remains broken, the broken parts will always remain pure. Says the Rambam halacha beis that chazaras klei matchis l'tomasan hayishana. This entire thing is only midivrei soifrim. And let's go to why. Why did they make such a decree? You might have a keli that became tummy. And you will melt it. And you'll make it into another keli on the same very day. If the Chachamim would have said to leave it as it is midin Torah, which is that this new keli you start, kedin Torah, then a person might erroneously say that hashvidim etaheres, breaking a keli makes it pure, which it does. Taking it to the mikveh makes it pure, which it does. But they're going to wrongfully compare the details one to the other. They're going to say, kshem, just like she'im nishbat, that if the keli breaks, and it's melted down, and you make out of it other kelim, whether you make it back the way it was. It's going to be tired, which is, by the way, they didn't try it. So people are going to say the toes. Oh, some skach imit bila. If you take it to the mikvah, afapishu shahu kishaya. You're taking it to the mikvah, even though it's the same keli. Like when you melt it broken and you make it back into the old, it's the same. It's tired right away, and people are going to think wrongfully that kelim don't need to have had of shemesh, which you need if you want to use it for truma or for kachim. And because of this concern, gozru tuma alayam. And I would say l'chayda, the only reason why they made the gezerah on metal and not on others, because the metal, I think, is the easiest if it breaks to fix it. Because metal you melt like a clay cheres. Go fix a shard. Go fix glass that it shattered and broke, or even wood. It's not properly fixed. Metal is mamash fixable. You melt it, you remake it. It's probably the most common keli that if it broke, you fixed it. So they made that takana.
Why just random knives? You still have to take it to the.
Okay, so already something very clear that in Parshas Matos, which is the source from the V'toher, there is another din, and that is that anything that was fully owned by a goy, now that a Jew buys it, has to be taken to the mikvah. But that's a whole different type of tumah.
But if a knife's fashioned, brand new knife's fashioned by the Jew, and you buy it, you don't have to take it.
No, all kalim, and that's another. We're not getting to right now the details, but just the concept that even if a Jew was a partner in kalim and he was never fully owned by a goy, then you don't have to take it to the mikvah. Being that many kalim are today made in companies, public companies that Jews have, they have stock. So that's why in many cases, even though we always go to the mikvah, we don't always make the bracha, because it might be a bracha levatala. Okay, halacha gimel. Echad kli shenitban b'meis. Doesn't matter how tamei the keli is, highest level of tumah. Oy b'shara tumah is the rule of the Rabbanan is always the same. That if it's melted, then melted meaning melted to fix it. Whether even if you made it into something else, avad if you made it back into what it used to be. The old tumah right away returns until you take it to the mikvah. And again, the truma v'kachim mikvah and wait until it's dark. Nitma b'meis. Now, if it became tamei b'tumas meis, and what happened was you began the purification process with the hiza olav ashlishi, right? Your third day you sprinkle, seventh day you sprinkle. After the third day, you decided to melt it down to make it into something different. And you knew that midrabanan, it's not good enough. So then you kept on counting, and on the seventh day, you sprinkled on it again, and you took it to the mikvah. The Rambam says, you know what you did? You did nothing. Because sprinkling on the third and on the seventh and mikvah has to be to that keli that became tamei, not to the keli that you rebuilt. Tamei. Because the sprinkling that happened before you melted it down does not combine to the hazah that you did after it got melted down. The aim leitara on the only way of keli that becomes tamei b'tumas meis. It's not just about shivas nikiyan, but 7 days with the sprinkling. How does it become pure? When it's a keli as it is before it breaks, or you begin everything after you refixed it. Acher sheyati chenu gavaldik halachadel barzel tamei. If you have iron itself, that is tamei. Now, how can you have iron that's tamei? Iron is not a keli. No. You had a keli, and it became tamei, and you melted it into a block of iron. And we are saying right now, midrabanan, whatever you'll make this into is going to be chazra tumah hayashana. So, and what happens if you mix that iron with irons that don't come from a tamei keli, with iron that's tahar? So you have a mixed iron. Here you follow majority. And even if it's half and half, theoretically, you know it's exactly half and half. You're going to be machmer tamei. Same thing will be if you have mud. Mud. Mud is used to make clay cheres, and you mix it with dung. Kalim that are made out of shards, made out of mud, are susceptible to becoming tamei. Kalim that are made out of dung are not susceptible to becoming tamei. Now you made a utensil out of both. Here we also, and everything was burnt up in a kiln. V'asa keli, here also roiv. If roiv came from clay, then it's makabel tumah. because now we're going to classify the keli as a klei cheres. If the majority of the raw material comes from galalim, comes from the dung, then einu makabel tuma. Interesting, just point out that the Rambam doesn't mention half and half. And I'll tell you something, you can't compare to the half and half of above, because the half and half of above, you began with something that inherently was tamei, the Rabbanan. Here you're beginning with something, nothing is tamei here. Now, why didn't the Rambam paskin half and half? I'm going to say because I'm sure the Rambam already said something before, and he expects us, his wannabe Talmidim, to know, to chap, what will be the halacha of half and half, and I don't know what that is yet. Halacha is, klei matchois hatohoidim. So if you have metal utensils that did not become tummy, sha'anochan ba'anoch, it was coated with an anoch, with a coating that's impure. Now, guys, I know what the Rambam writes over here. I'm going to quote what the Rambam quotes. He schwitzed on this. And being that the source of this halacha, l'cho'ura, is a Tosefta. And in the Tosefta, the Tana writes the opposite. He writes here to hoidim. And at the end of this halacha, he writes to meim. So the Rambam La'am suggests that that's mistama the version in the Rambam. So again, I don't mind saying that I don't understand. That's fine. We definitely don't understand. The words we have is tameim. Now, why would it be tameim? I'm just saying it doesn't fit, because the Rambam constantly paskin, and we learned this many times over, that any coated utensil by default is tahar. So I'm going to go on his shoulders and say that l'chayda the words are tahar, because even though the anach was tamei, the moment you use a material only as a coating, then the coating is like bottle. The coating is just subservient to the main keli. But the opposite, if the entire keli would have been made out of the anach tamei, so then again, it fits better if the Rambam would have written harehem tameim. And let's go with the possibility, at least, that this was what the Rambam wrote, because then it's going to be aligned to Tosefta for sure, writes it that way. And then somewhere, someone, the printer, the copier, had a l'chaim, had a very good fabrengen, and he got confused over here. Or the Rambam writes the way it's printed, and then God should write it and enlighten us to chap. Halacha a kardaim or kurdaim, shasum and abar zalatoy. So you have a hatchet, and you're gonna have, okay, so all you need to do over here, Kevin, is that this is a hatchet that has blades from both sides, and the one side is wide, like chopping wood, and the other side is a point, and that a pointed metal instrument was used by carpenters to make carvings in wood, a dual purpose. So the thick side was made out of pure. But also, ushpain, the other side, the sharp side of the blade was made from metal that's tamei. So we say tamei. The opposite, also ushpain minatoy, vakad minatamei, tohoy. Interesting. Because the sharp part, interesting, is used for a much more delicate type of melacha than stam knapping wood. It's considered the more chashuva part of the keli, and therefore the rules tumatara will follow that edge. Halacha zayin kurdem toy, and shachasoma it was coded the barzel tamei. Here it fits. Here the Rambam writes start again, because the Rambam keeps on paskening, right? Tzipui, that tzipui is bottled to the keli, and ein chipui akelim, the Rambam writes, cannot be tamei, as we learned a few times already. Halacha ches kitoin shasom ben hatamei v'shulav ben hatoy. So you have a pitcher. The mouth of the pitcher is made out of a metal. Again, metal, as we're learning in this chapter, that was tamei before. Now that you make it back into a keli, chazav tumah yeshana. But the area, the bottom part, the base is a tar. So the din is tar. I know that when you pour out, you need the spout. I get that. But a keli is not defined by the area from where you pour things out. A keli is defined by where does the content rests in. That's the ikar. If I care. I love it. Think about it. You can even argue that the spout is like the mashpia. Clear. So how do you define who sets the tone? The makabel, not the mashpia. Yeah, halacha tes. L'chaim. Klei matchois. Shenitma betumashim divrei soifrim Like, for example, it's tummy because it was Shinit Avodah Zarah, and we learned, guys, that it's only Tomei D'Rabbanan, and now it breaks, and now you melted it, beautiful, and now you made another keli. And what's the normal rule? Double the Rabbanans. It's like Exeda L'Exeda. The whole Tomei Avodah Zarah is Midrabbanan. The whole topic of this chapter, Chazar L'Tumah Hayishon, is Midrabbanan. Normally, you would say, double the Rabbanan, there's not a problem. But you know what? What's the other side? That Avodah Zarah is very chomer. And maybe, even though it's only Midrabbanan, the fact that Avodah Zarah is Mitamei, that's big. And there's indeed, halachically, there's a suffix. Harez a suffix, Chazar L'Tumah Hayishon, Oile Chazar. How great is that? Halachiyot. Now, my fellow Yidden, from now until the end of the chapter, we're moving on to Klei Zechuchas. And Klei Zechuchas, generally, the reason why Midrabbanan it's tummy, it's because it's like a cheres, but we learned from the beginning, it's not like a cheres. You have to have contact. It doesn't make a difference, the inside and the outside. Now we're going to see other rules when it comes to a Klei Zechuchas. Klei Zechuchas and it move it came tummy, and now it breaks. So the din is not like metal, even if you melted down glass, which is what people can do. You can also fix glass similar to the way you fix metal. That's why it's a chiddush. And you made from it other glass utensils. Why? Here we say double the Rabbanan. Don't forget, the entire tumah to begin with by glass is midrabbanan. And like gazru alim, the tumah yeshana. And gazru gzeda l'gzeda. If it breaks, even though that each broken part can still be used. And normally, what did we learn above when it came to wooden utensils, right? When it came to clay etzem, which is like wooden utensils. When it came to clay matcha, is the most chamor. If you can still use it, it's still a keli. Glass is different. And you know why? I'm telling you, because it's dangerous. It's sharper, even worse than a cheres, as we know. You can, God forbid, get cut. So people push it, don't use it. Is, I'm telling you, it's based not so much on a halachic term, it's based on a practical term. If I have a kelei cheres that broke, I know that many times the shard will be sharp, but I'm not that afraid of it. When your mug that you have coffee in the morning breaks, and versus a glass that breaks, you have little kindlech in the house, you should definitely be concerned, but you should be more concerned by the glass. It's much sharper. Even though you made it based, the part that you are using is not mekabel tuma. And here it's clear. Here you see it's about danger. If you level it, you understand, you file it down. Now it's, the edges are not going to cut you. Then it's about danger. And he tells us, if you have a little bottle. How little? Little meaning you can pick it up on one hand. And the top of it was broken off. It's still mekabel tuma. A bottle is something, not the way you think a bottle, you go into the fridge and you drink out of the bottle. A bottle, no one drink out of. So here, since no one drink out of it, these size utensils, people will still use it even though it's broken. Obviously, guys, there's no doubt that time and place affects these dinim. Today we're living in a world of mamash pre-Mashiach with abundance, almost kachol hayam. People throw these things out. It has to do with, people didn't throw it out. Aval gedayla, but a larger bottle that can be taken that you need 2 hands to pick it up. If the top was removed, because since people would also stick their hands in and out of it, and no one would keep it around because you don't want to stick your hand into a keli when the top of the thing is glass that's broken. A perfume bottle, which was common, that was made out of glass. And again, we're speaking about the because perfume is the because even smaller, it was not just to hold the perfume. How would people get the perfume on them? Those Frenchies, you would touch the top of the bottle, and if it's broken glass, people would throw it out. Large pictures that the mouth go, all this is glass. Because they would use for pickling. And what's the thing? By any keli that the halach yelech is put stuff in it and leave it for a long time. I know that at the end, when you want to remove it, there's a sakana. But it's very different. The keli that you're constantly going in and out of, that's where people are concerned. By glass, they throw it away. Something that the chalal is used to keep something stored for a long time. The way the thinking is, let me pickle it. And then at the end, I'll remove it one time and I'll remember people would use it. Halacha yud gimel. Choishen nivgam. Rubai. If the majority of the glass is damaged. Or nivgam only shlish hakefai, but of God, right? So here's so not to rubai. Rubai, the first thing is the majority of the top was broken. The majority of the top means that one might argue, very good, keep that picture up, that I can still drink it out of the unblemished part. So first, if rubai of the circumference of the top is cracked, people would throw it out. Even if only a third of it broke, there's a lot more unbroken. But if it didn't break just on the top, it went down the wall. It went down beroiv gavai. That's also called a broken keli. Think about it. Whoever sees the Zoom, I mean, that's a picture. That glass people throw out, and therefore it's called tag. Now, another din, which is unusual, nikaf usasamai. If there's a hole in glass and you fill it up, you plug it up, whether you're using ba'ats, which is some sort of tin, whether you're using some sort of tar, tahar. What's shatar? We're going to contrast that chevra soon. By glass, it's not fixed b'chlal. You know, a hole. The word of a hole is there's no danger here. Elamat's broken. Can you fix it? It's not called fixed. It's difficult to seal glass, especially in the days of old. Therefore, if anything has a hole, halacha yud dalet, a large pot, or a bowl, that have a hole. If it is milmailam, which means that you can, it's only towards the top. There's no edges that are sharp. It's only that it's very large. You can't use it all the way to the top because the contents will fall out, but you can still use the bottom part. Then they are tameim. No, it's as long as you can use it. Now we go back to the normal rules, and there's no danger of getting cut. People use it. It remains tummy. If it is milmata, so therefore even the contents in the bottom of this large bowl will fall out. Then tohid. What happens if it's cracked? So like this, will the items seep out of the crack? And then by glass, if you put heat, the heat will make the crack grow both in its length and grow in its depth. So if even hot like cold, putting it in there will not seep out, you know, you have a crack on the glass tray of your car. There's a point that you can still use it. However, then tamei. But if lav, that means that if you put heat, it's going to start seeping out, then tohidim. Halacha tezvav. Hakoises, hachatuchim, large containers whose mouths were removed, afapishas of the same serchem as apeh, even though they can scratch your mouth. These large containers were used for storage, like we had before by a pickling. So yeah, if you would put your mouth on it, you would, God forbid, cut your mouth, but they're not used for that. And they're not used for in and out every day. They're used for things for long-term storage. They are still considered kelam and kabbalim tumam. Now, halacha tezayin, for a far case, shows a chuchis, and a far case, Yaron, for you speak modern Hebrew, mashpech. In other words, you have a keli that the top is wide and the bottom is narrow. The fancy wine schmeckers, they put the wine, they want the wine to get oxygenated. So that you pour the wine into this glass mamish thing, then it goes into your cup. Now there's air in your wine. Ooh, now you can say, yeah, I taste the difference. Now it's amazing. So the din is tod. Why is it tod? Because it's not considered the keli. It's not considered the keli. In other words, let's go back. You know what a keli means? A clay kibble. It's like a pipe. He calls it a distributor. Even though the bottom is narrower, so it's not like the wine just flows out. Or I'm just saying wine as a mushel. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter that it gets stuck a little bit. It goes in quicker, it goes out slower. It's not a keli. Halacha yud zayin. A glass that's used as a pane. In other words, what we call today a glass, what we put today on the window, or what many people interpret in Lashon HaKabbalah, aspeklaria hameira. I know that on the Bar Mitzvah Maimer, aspeklaria hameira, we teach a Vergrößerung glass, magnifying glass. It's one way. There's another way of teaching it. Aspeklaria hameira means a pane, a see-through glass. She'ena Meida means a mirror. Looking forward versus looking backwards. That's a big theme in Kabbalah. Most people live their lives, they can see things backwards. They see God when they look backwards. God was with me. Forwards, they're like in the, I don't know. The big tzaddikim, they lechatchila see was tutzach. Okay, weiter. So anyways, this type of Torah, afa pishi mekabelos. So if you think about a glass that it was very expensive then. Why? Because the sunas is like Kabbalah. It's made to be a window. Whenever you learn in the Chazal, windows didn't mean glass. Windows means just a hole in the wall. If you remember in Masechta Shabbos, and then they would have these shutters that they would stick in, like these wooden plugs, big squares. This glass is what we're talking about.
Or any glass for show, like a piece of art that's a glass.
So l'chayda, a piece of art. So if it's tachshid adam, if it's tama tachshid, if it's not lo adam, l'chayda, it's not a keli for Kabbalah Satum. Huh?
It fall under this ice in the mar.
No, it's not made like Kabbalah. It's not a keli. If you even call that art. And then, in other words, if it, I don't know. Okay, that's interesting. I don't think it's a piece of art is makabel tumah. The artist will love it. It's so holy. Can't even become tumah. Now, a ladle. Oh, here we go. A ladle made out of glass. Even though when you put it on the table, it turns to the side. It's makabel tumah. Because that's the way it's used. It's not used to put down. It's used, you hold it, and when you hold it, it has a receptacle. The receptacle is makabel tumah. The final halach of this chapter, hatamchui, shows a glass pot that's made out of, we're all speaking about glassware, made out of glass. But someone turned that into a window. You know, they didn't change it. But they had a hole in the wall. They want to plug it up, and they want to be able to see through. So they stuck this pot into the window, mikabel tumah. Because since it was made for a pot, it remained, and it's a pot. However, but what happens? It's like an art piece. You are not going to use it as a pot. You simply want to have a display where you can put some things in it, and you want people to be able to see it. Even though it has a receptacle. It was made special to store things for people to be able to see it, then it's tahor. No, it's if it was not made to function as a container, herst, this good. Not the Rambam goes so brief over here. When is it a keli? Even when it's a keli, when it's made to contain, only when it's a final product. It doesn't even say what that means. It is what it is, when it's a final product. All right, my fellow Yidden, Perek Shloisha Asar, we're moving on to today's second chapter. Perek Shloisha Asar is now, guys, it all began with the 7 types of kelim. And what we are now going to focus on is the very unique dinim of a klei cheres. And I know that we learned so much about a klei cheres that we are going to be familiar with a lot, or if not with everything that Rambam writes in this chapter, but we have to focus on a klei cheres. In other words, we want to know, Dovi, how does a klei cheres acquire tumah? Unique. How does it impart tumah? Unique. Doesn't follow the rules of all the other kelim. Halberik Shleishos has 14 halachas, beginning with halacha al. Kfar bi'arnu b'kayim b'kayim. Unlike by Klei Zachuchas, we learned, it was good that we learned today, Perek Yud Beis, the second half. Klei Cheres, that Rambam is writing, he already spoke about it many times. But the Rambam is Masudar. We have to focus and put together and appreciate the contrast. He's doing that between Klei Cheres and everything else. So first of all, She'ein Klei Cheres mistame. It does not acquire Tumah Elama Viroi, only from its inner airspace. Or if a Zav moves it, because as we explained, when a Zav is moving a Keli, he is affecting the inner airspace because he's moving the inner airspace. When you move the walls, so before inside was over here. When you move it a little bit to the right, inside is a little bit to the right. All the other Kalim, only if there's physical contact. All the other Kalim, even metal is the most susceptible to Tumah. If the source of Tumah enters its airspace, and I don't care if its airspace is a mile long, and it's all the way in it. If there is no physical contact, then they remain tahar. Nimsar comes out. Hatome, we had this contrast between wood and metal. The Rambam used the same lashon. Now we're going into klicheres and everything else. That hatome b'klicheres, the source of tuma entered only its airspace. Troy b'chalakelim. Hatome b'chalakelim. What's troy b'chalakelim? Physical contact from the outside. Something touched the metal utensil. Then troy b'klicheres, because even the gia, right from the outside. Milabad, not milagav, does not. It will not inquire tuma. That makes it different. Now, first of all, the Rambam wants a source. It says in Parashat Shmini, "V'chol klei cheres asher yipol mehem el toichoi." El toichoi. V'goyim says, mi toichoi umestame. Only from the inside, v'loy ma'achayrev. Now, halacha number 2, another unique din of a klei cheres. Uchashem shem mistame ma'aviroi kach me tame. It imparts. Now, klei cheres will not be matam another klei cheres. So, not about imparting it to kalim, but a keli imparts tuma to eichlan amashke. It imparts it ma'aviroi. Wow. In other words, contact is not needed. Ketzad, for example, klei cheres, it's already tummy, and we already say it became tummy because ma'aviroi. Now, some genius took a pickle, he just put it inside the airspace of the keli. It didn't touch. It entered the aviroi. That there is no contact. Also, harehem tameim. As it says, it's a pasuk. No, it's not about it touching the toichai. It's about it being betoichai. However, in contrast, when the keli is already tamei, it won't impart tuma, not to eichlin, not to mashkin, until there is physical contact. I'm having coffee, push a different kelim. I'm getting a good. Now, now, yes, a klei cheres imparts tuma even ma'aviroi. Remember the clown. We learned this many times that ein klei cheres matame kelim ma'aviroi ben klei cheres min chalakel. Klei cheres cannot be matame kelim. Ketzad, for example, klei cheres godel, which you should know that was the most common material used in the times of Chazal. It was the least expensive. And shahoyu b'toichei kelim. And the nichnas atuma ba'aviroi. So the din is the klei cheres is coming. The other kelim that are in it. Now, don't forget, when another keli is in the klei cheres, it doesn't matter whether it's resting on the ground of the keli, whether it's suspended by a string. It doesn't make. It's not about negia. Anything in it theoretically will become tamei. So you have two things hanging in the keli. Even think about that. I have a sheretz hanging inside the keli, and I have another keli hanging, and I have food hanging. Just don't know how it's going to happen. So the sheretz, which is an av, makes the klei cheres into a rishon, not the food hanging. Now that the klei cheres is a rishon, it's metama do oichlin into a sheni. Cannot be metama the kelim. The kelim are tahir. Now let's go further. What happens? What did we say? That the kelim are not tamei. Oichlin or mashkin in it is tamei. So if I put a keli in the klei cheres, and in that keli, there's mashkin. Now what's the din? The mashkin will become tamei. And yes, we know that, like we mentioned, a sheretz makes the keli into a rishon. Normally you would say, okay, the mashkin are sheni. We also learned together, midrabanan, all mashkin become tchila. And not number one. Number two, we learned today that mashkin can be metame kelim midrabanan. We don't say double the rabbanan here. Oh, nitma mashkin ma'aviroi. Now, I want to add something in detail. I don't know if it's in this chapter or in the next chapter that God willing we're learning today. If this is a klei cheres, so I like these two kelim. This is a klei cheres. And this I put inside the other. Which means even though some of it is in the keli, but the top of the inner keli is going upwards, it's not considered as if it's inside. That's not the case of it. These details we'll get to later. Even though the liquid that's in the inner one is in the toich of the keli, but there's enough of the top is protruding outwards. That's not the case of the halacha gimel. We're speaking about where there is an inner keli that's all the way in there. Another detail that we'll learn in our next chapter, tzamid puzzle. It's not sealed tight. It's in there. So even that's the whole part. That's a chiddush. Even though the source of the tumah is the keli cannot make the inner keli tamei, but the outer keli makes the mashkin tamei, and then the mashkin makes the keli tamei. And now the smaller container says mitamecha. The smaller container tells the mashkin, what made you tamei? What made the mashkin tamei? The outer keli did not have the ability to make me tamei, but somehow you made me tamei, which is really ironic, because if the source could not have affected you, how can the derivative affect you? And that's the klal. And because of the rules in halacha, sometimes it's not that way. Sometimes you want to, in positive, you want to have an effect on your Reuven. You want to have a good hashpa on Levi. For some reason, you're too far removed from Levi. But if you have an effect on Shimon, Shimon will have an effect on Levi. And that's the way of the world. Now look, now that we said that mashkin is matama kelim, and let's go further. There is this power of mashkin to be matama midrabanan. Mashkin tameim ba'achoyrev. The mashkin are tameim. It touched the outer part. Nitmu achoyrev kishar kol hakelim. Midrabanan. That was the drabanan that we learned. Only the outside becomes tameim, but only the outside. If the mashkin would touch the insides, even though midai raisa mashkin cannot be matama kelim, midrabanan is going to be matama all of the kelim. If it's matama on the outside, and the beauty is that for us to remember it's only a tumah midrabanan, that's where they said only the outside is tumah. Like this, people are going to remember that even if it passes tumah to tumah and kachim, they're not going to burn. And then at least then the outside midrabanan becomes tamei from only from mashkin. That's the exception. If you have a piece of shard that has no receptacle, then go by mashkin to meim. Even this rabbinic chumrah that mashkin are matama kelim, even there ain't no mashkin. I know we learned this, that Rambam is putting all of the dinim together because now we're focusing on the helchas kelim kleicheres. No go eichlan mashkin ba'achaydik kleicheres atamei. The dinis are elo tameim. No, it's now. Oh, 1 second over here. Here we're speaking about a kleicheres that became tamei ma'avira. Once a kleicheres is tamei, so then again midrabanan. This is all rabbinic tumas. Even though how did we begin this chapter that a kleicheres only imparts tumah from the inside in and out? Then oichlan mashkin ba'achaydik kleicheres itamei. Now. The din is halacha. This and guys, this is all midrabanan. Okay, halacha hey, right? Which is normally that's how would tuma enter the airspace? I don't know. You have a keli, you put him near a sheretz. I have a simple kasha. What happens if I take a klei cheres that's empty, Dovi, and I turn it upside down? There's a dead sheretz on the table, Shabbos, muksa. So you cover it with a keli. No one sees it. That's called it went to the inner space. Now, the Rambam will make it clear in halacha above. We're not saying, I don't want to turn this cup upside down because I have a few cups of coffee still. We're not saying that if it's mile on top, mile means if there's a sheretz over here, trying to get that, and I put the cup over here, but the bottom of the cup is here on top, it will not become done. It means that if the sheretz entered the ear space, even though upside down, you understand? So if I put it on the table that's holding up the sheretz, that means that the sheretz is inside the rim of the keli. That's called inside. You got it? Good. So whether it's normal, it becomes an oil, but not oil meaning above. Oil means, yeah, we're using the word oil, but the tuma is in it. It becomes tummy. And furthermore, when it says el toichai, which is an extra el toichai, it's coming fakir to bimaram is that even if it is an oil, even if it is upside down. But the Rambam has to clarify, we're using the word oil, but by tumas oil, by tumas mace, oil on top, I don't have to be within the walls. The oil doesn't even need walls. Here, you have to be within the wall space. Halacha gimel. And therefore, if there is a guma, you have a little pit on the ground. And in the pit meaning there's a little indentation. There's a sheretz, obviously a dead sheretz. And the chafa of kleicheres al guma, and you turn over kleicheres. It means that the kleicheres is mahil on the sheretz, but the sheretz is beyond, lower than any part of the walls, even the edges. Then loy nitma, because the Torah says el toichai achet ikanas atzma shel tuma b'toichai. In other words, halacha hey is normal. You have a tabletop, like we said. You turn over a cup over a sheretz. The sheretz is in it. It doesn't have to be only when the cup is standing upright. That's the din. And we're going to have many halachas from this nuchashtei shel tanur. The tanurim, not only were they commonly made out of cheres, but they were put on the ground, and the ground was karka. And if you think about an earthen floor, especially in an oven where there's fire on it and you're stoking it, so you have the ground, the upper part, the periphery of the ground of the tanur. That's called the nechushtoi. Many reasons why they use the word nechoshes. And it could be that things are underneath it. Now, a tanur is made out of cheres. We just said that it's not oil. If it's not within, it's not going to become tamei. So if there's a sheretz underneath it, now you can say, maybe, how did it get underneath it? It died when it was in the tanur. And then when you were stoking about, you pushed it on the ground. If that would have happened, the tanur would be tamei. But we don't know that. We can argue that the sheretz was alive when it was in the tanur. And you stuck it in the ground, you buried it alive, but it died already under the ground. We're going to say that. What's the nechushtei that Rambam says? I know it sounds like the word nechoshes, but means the bottom fakert. He brings in the whoever has a chayenu. There's a pasuk in Yecheskel that they use the words nechoshes in reference to exactly that.
So like a weight, how does it get through the bottom?
No, it's earth. It's
How
earth.
does it get through the bottom?
Because I think when you have on the ground of a tanur, you have pyres of wood or of coals, and you're constantly poking it, and you're moving it, and you're sweeping it, and you're adding to it, things get stuck into the ground. Ground is not the way we have floors. Ground is earth. Things go in, things go out. And a sheretz can be something little. It's a big, if one of the shots, and if it is a crocodile, some say, that you're not going to have that under the nechushtoi if it didn't die first. We're speaking about a little mouse. A baby mouse, or a little salamander, if that can be little things and it's underneath the ground. You can argue that it died only after it got there. And only it's a guma. It's under the ground. Now let's speak about kalim or a tamas. Now it's going the opposite direction. You want to know if the keli acquire tuma. So what did we learn in the beginning of this chapter? That kleicheres acquires and imparts. So now we're speaking about the imparting part. If there's something tamei in the tanur, and there also happens to be a machad like tabas, he's using examples though of kelim that are little. Okay, nevertheless, and we just had it above, right? That we're speaking about the tumah midrabanan fakert, even midrabanan, even if kelim touch. But weiter harei hatanur. No. Okay, right. So harei hatanu tohar. So what are we talking about? The keli. The kelim are tamei. The kelim are tamei. Stam kelim. Okay, we're speaking about a tabas and a machad that you find that midrabanan has a din of tumah. and it's going to have a very high level of tumah midrabanan, and that will impart tumah to a klei cheres. Now here it's different. How can it not impart tumah? We must say that the machad or the tabas was already in the ground prior to you building the tanur. That's the only way, because how did it get, if it went into the airspace of the keli, it's going to be matam the keli. Tanur, shani yomer she'im hoyu. Guys, I know that there's certain scenarios where you see it's not the case. Then it will be different. But here you can make that presumption. Now, if you find it in a pile of ash, even if the ash went into the guma, that we don't say that. Because you have nothing to be toilet on. There's only ash, my friends, when you have a tanur. Why would there be ash there? And the machad is tummy. We're speaking about a machad. We're speaking about a machad or a tabas that's metame a keli. Very good. Now, nimsu ben chushte sholtanu. This machad or tabas is not an ash, but it's under the ground. It's under the ground, not buried, but right under the ground. Nidin. And you know how close under the ground you can mamish see it. It's mamish there. Right? They're not going into the airspace. So if you're going to put over there dough and the dough is going to touch it. Why is that? Because batzek is very soft. And anything that's soft makes its way into crevices. Then nitma tanur. No, there's lamata men chushtai, bin chushtai. Now, the A's a batzek kamru, but batzek benini. Now, guys, I want you to know, I got stuck here yesterday. Loy kasha, I get it, because if the batzek is kasha, then it's not going to touch it. But the more it goes into the crevices. So I don't know why not rach b'yosef. Okay, right.
It doesn't matter how deep it is; it'll always reach it.
That's right. Okay, it's my problem.
Even if it was there before the oven was built, if it's wrapped with it, it's going to reach it. So it's not a proof that it went through the oven.
Even if it was there before.
Even if it was there before you built the oven, if it's wrapped with it, it's so liquid, it'll reach everything.
Okay, he's right. No, it's a very shkoich. If it's rach b'yoser, then it would reach even deeper, and you only say it's ki'im hu b'tanur. It has to be closer to the surface. Thank you. Now, halacha zayin hasheret shenimtza ba'ayin shel tanur. So just to know, the word ayin of a tanur is that the Kavan had a great picture of. First of all, the walls of tanurim were thick. They were not like we have today with the technology. And the hole that they would make in the wall, through which they would put wood in and out. It was more towards the ground. Or sometimes you needed to have oxygen go into the oven to feed the fire. So that would be a place where you would manipulate, you would open and close. It's an opening in the wall. Is that, and it's thick walls. We want to know whether the thickness of the wall is that b'toy chatanur, or is that out? That's the topic right now. So you find the sheretz ba'ayin shaltanur, or in the eye of a kira, or in the eye of a kupa. They all share the same thing, that in the sides, in the walls, there was an opening. In other words, inside the tanur means inside the tanur, even if it's deep in the wall, but it didn't go within the inside of the part of the iron. And furthermore, if it is about avid or iron toy, it's only inside the ear space. Now, what's very important to note is that let's not forget what we learned in Hilchos Tumas Mace. There it's much different, because if you have a mace, first of all, mace is matama ba'oya. Then we learned that even if the mace is in this room, if there's a poseach tefach, which is open from this room to that room, the tumah goes through. So that's something else. These irons were open. When do we say that it's not b'toich lecheres? That's if it's not a mace. But filu, and furthermore, filu shem gedais when a mace to hide him. Why? Because it's not inside the tanur. But elam kein hoiseboy ayin poseach tefach. Right, because if there's a pesach tefach, if this window went out, it was normally very small. It's called an eye. But if there's an opening of a tefach by a tefach, then you're right that the tumor right now is only in the wall, in the window. I get it. But so what? The tumor there goes inside the tanur. Today maybe it's a tumor laver tanur, like we learned, guys, and pedicure base of hilchas tumas makes. Nimsa sheres umakam and hanachasa eitzim. And again, you're speaking about tanurim, even though I kept on mentioning that they put the pyres on the floor of the tanur in very large ovens. They actually had a system that the wood was put in a little opening that was connected to, that was open to, but it was outside the main cavity. It's like a pregnant woman. It was like a little thing that protruded. Minas, so here again, if it's not inside the tanur proper, it's not going to impart tumah. Minas avrimis olachutz, even though it's mamash near tahar. Another thing, when you have in the bathhouses, how do you think they got the water hot? They would burn coals under the ground. It's a system, and there also there was a source for the fuel, wood or what, a coal, whatever they had, and it was not inside. Or so you're having a person that's dyeing materials. All these are all different types of tanurim made out of earthenware, where the place where the fuel was put was not inside of, it was right adjacent outside of it. One place was open to the other, but it was outside of it. Or people would cook olives. For maybe you needed to cook it prior to pressing it. In all of these cases, toich means you don't combine one airspace with the other. We're not talking about tumas meis, like the Rambam just mentioned, that if there's a pesach tefach, it goes. That's not the point. The point is it has to be b'toich klei cheres. Halacha number 9. Weiter, ein hatanur v'lo yakiram v'lo yishar mekoymas hayukoyt mistamin chavre halkop elim kein nimtzeis hatuma min hasasuma v'lefnim. Very good. Now, when did we say everything above up until halacha tes? Is that if the keli is tahar, and now there's a source of tuma in an area adjacent to, but not in. So now that I'm on Paskin, what did we learn before? Oh, the tuma is not inside the klei cheres, it's not inside the tanur. But let me ask you in the opposite direction. The opposite direction is that if the tanur of the kirayim becomes tamei, if the tumah has to be inside, but the Rambam is trying to say, Dovi, that if the tumah is inside the tanur, then even that ayin, we understand, also becomes tamei. It goes in the other direction. It just does not acquire from there. It's not mistamin. Elam Kainim says, like, what is he adding in halachates? If I understand correctly, he's implying that once it does become tamei, I think that's what the Rambam writes. It just makes sense. It's not like it's like he's repeating it. To impart tumah. Once the inside is tamei, we consider that area as subservient to. Beautiful. Halacha. You have a certain earthenware utensil that there's some sort of screen in the center. All right. The point of the screen is that when water is coming out of the klecheres, you don't want it to go only into one place. You want it to go into various different places, or many people should be able to drink out of the klecheres altogether. There's some sort of a screen. Another din usfasai. So first of all, the waters in over and under are still considered in the same klecheres. Another detail: many shard kalim, they would, for design, lenoi, they wouldn't just have an edge, but on some areas they would have things protruding upwards. There's some sort of comb. I know that Rambam La'am has a picture that I'm the Chayeno. They don't like the picture of the Rambam La'am. So in other words, it's a keli that has compartments in it. This type of screen compartments, there are some sort of edges, and some parts of it there's like a crown going above it. That type of masrek is called a tzartzor. It's some sort of design. Even if the tumah only entered to the airspace of the masrek of the tzartzur, nitma kuloi. No, it's toicha means any part of toicha. Halach yudal kleicheres shahoyu loisholish sefasiyois zuluf nemizu. Here we go. So you have 3 walls. One is further inner than the other. Now toicha means inside We already spoke about it a moment before. Like when you have two kalim, that's the topic that we mentioned before. If I have two kalim, guys, here are my two kalim. So even though the inner one is skinnier, it fits in the outer one, but the sfasayim of it will be very, very halachically important to know if the edges, if the lips, if the rim of the inner one is above the outer one, it's not halachically inside of it. Now we're getting to that. But before we get into separate kalim, there is one keli, but it has different walls inside of it. So we have to know the height of the walls will determine the height. That's not a picture for this. The height of the walls will be very important. If the pnimius walls were the highest, and then Tuma only enters the Pnimius. It's the same concept of my design, even though here it's two different kalim. We're going to get to that same thing. In other words, what we determine now, you can argue, what are you talking about? It's one kalim. The sheretz is inside of it. Why isn't it inside all, let's say three, let's say there are two walls, which makes it into three compartments. Because if the innermost walls go highest, we consider that a keli for itself. Okay. Same thing. The consistent. If the middle walls are the tallest, so the vart will be that anything that falls from the middle and in is considered one keli. But again, it protects it from the outer. If the outermost walls are the highest, then everything in it is considered taka inside. A sheretz falls in it, it all becomes tummy. If they are equal, only shenitma avida tameya. If they are all of the same height, then we taka judge each one standalone, which is great. And all of the other ones, even the inner, the outer, they're all tahar. Halacha yud beis. Now we're going to go into what I spoke about, the different pots, the different kelim. So the case he's giving is frying pans. That was common. That you put one frying pan inside the other. Maybe when you store it, that's I know in my kitchen drawer, that's how you do it. So very good picture. You have a couple of frying pans, and all of them have the same height. Now here are the different kalim. Let's go. Al means the innermost one, or the sheretz is in the outermost one. So here we say zush yesh by sheretz tameya. The shadol fasim tohidim hein b'chaloichlan shabahem mamish, like we had at the end of Malachi Yud Aleph. In other words, it's the height of the keli which will determine whether it's connected, whether it's inside, or whether it's standalone. If you call ilfas mem lekuva b'kainis mashkana. Oh, guys, Pedik Yud Aleph. We're going to get to today, God willing, in the next chapter. We're going to return to this din of a perforated klei cheres. Sometimes, I know it's not always. If the shivrei kelim. If a hole is big enough, not only big enough for liquid to seep out, for that you need a minimum hole or crack. It's big enough that if I put a keli with a hole and I put it on top of water, the hole is large enough that allows the water to enter. It's bigger than moitzi mashka. It's called koines mashka. That's already considered perforated by kli cheres. And now every single ilfas had such a hole. You know what that means? That mitzad dinei kelim, none of them are kalim. Asher it's bol yoino. You know what the whole affects? Kol ha'oichlin v'hamashkin shebechol ha'ilfas in atameim. Because it's interesting. I want you to know something, guys, that the kalim themselves are tahar. Batal mitraydas keli. Chiddush is it's batal mitraydas keli for it not to acquire tumah. But the other din, that if there's a sheretz inside a keli, all the other food and drinks inside the keli become tameh, that is still a keli for. And since there's perforations, there's no separation. It's gavaldik. All of them are tameh. And by the way, Kamesh Yisbar goes to the next chapter. We're going to have it again. The chiddush is that it's amazing. If it's not a keli, so how can it's keli enough to say that in it there's food and drink. And I don't care about the edges higher and lower because each one was bottled, so they cannot be a mechitza. It's a keli l'chum and not l'kum. That's the word. Ho yasheretz betachtoinon. He tamei b'kolom tohoidim. Shaharei loy nichnas asheretz la'aver ol yoino. Okay, when did we say above if the sheretz is only vol yoino? Bolyonim means in the outermost one, Dovi. If it's in the outermost one, if it's the innermost one, it's the same thing. In the innermost one, it is the inner, then all of the food is tummy. If the sheretz in this case is in the outermost one, which is called the bottom one, only he to kulam to hoirois, sharele nichnas sheretz la'avarol yonim. Didn't even enter the airspace. And the aim sfasa tachtoina defis. If the sfasa tachtoina would go higher, the moment the keli that has the highest walls, everything that's in it is called in it, but that's not the case. If the sheretz is only in the highest one, then why shasheretz b'toicha? The chein hatachtoina will become tamei mepnei shesfasei defes. That's not when there's a hole. Very good. Here we're speaking about the edges. Great. Now, now there's something else. Guys, we had this in the beginning of this chapter, right? That you made me tamei, right? You made me tamei. We had this in the beginning of this chapter. So hold on. Even if the kleicheres is not matama kleicheres, what did we learn? Mashkin. Mashkin is matama kleicheres. So if there was mashkin tefeach, then kol sheish b'mashkin tefeach tameya. Shamashkin mestami ma'avir atatoinu aydefes v'chod ma'masakelim. Then even the kelim become tamei. That expression. What made you tamei did not make me tamei, but you are somehow making me tamei. Halacha yud gimel tavlo shel cheres. If you have a tabletop, a flat cheres. And from the outset, they would attach different bowls. That's how it was made. Even though mitzad echad, there's a truth to say that it's all considered one keli. It's one because it was lachatchila made all attached. Mitzad sheni, it's still considered separate kelim for this din. That if a nitmes achas mehem loy nitmu kulam. In other words, every bowl is considered here a kelim ifnei atzma. Well, let's make that on the tabletop there is a little rim. I don't need for the rim to go over the bowls. Here they are attached. You know what that outer rim does on the tabletop? That combines everything in it into one. Now I don't need to have guys. I don't need for this rim to be tall. Fact that there's a rim outside the tabletop, that halachically makes everything into one keli. So if a sheretz enters one keli, all of them acquire tumah. The chein adin, the beis hatavlin shel cheres, they would have common. They would have certain containers that would have different compartments. Why different compartments? Because you had different herbs. You didn't want one herb to mix with the other. The kalmedim, or you had hamasimois, or if you had a inkwell. You have an inkwell, you have different colors ink. So you can have one keli that has different little bowls because everyone is holding ink. You don't want to mix with the other. Since they, if there is a rim, if it's flat without a rim, they're going to use separate kelim. The rim outside of the the base will combine it. That's the same thing. I would argue that as long as there's a rim, which means it's all one keli, and there's a toich, so everything becomes tam. Halacha yudalid, the final halacha in this chapter, based on tzivolin, shall 8, you have this type of wooden spice compartment. Until now, we were speaking about earth. Shenit ma'echa mibata b'mashkin, loy nitmu sha'ar habatim, loy nitmu sha'ar habatim. We don't say that they are combined. That's same thing. In other words, if there's no rim, they're not combined. However, same thing by wood and the nitma echem mebat v'mashkin nitmu kulam. Why? Sha'akoka kli echad ukli shenitma toicha b'mashkin nitma kulai. Now, there's a deal that many make over here. What are we talking about right now? We're talking about 8s, right, Dovi? By 8s, we're not machalik. We're not machalik, right, between the inside and the outside. But over here, the Rambam is emphasizing only from the inside and not from the outside. Because mitzat sheni, it's different kelim. In other words, what makes it one keli? The toich, the fact that there is a toich. Okay. Your bottom masmad. If the compartments were not just there, but they were affixed with a nail. Okay. If these containers are only wedged in, then they are only a chibur latuma, but not lahazoya. And if the boxes finally came in as itching for a picture, if you have boxes that inside are the bottom inside can be taken and put in. The picture that we have here is exactly that. You have an outer box, and you have little boxes in it, different compartments, but they're not even wedged in. They're made. I mean, they fit nicely, but then it's not connected. And not lahazov. The ashes of the red heifer don't have to go on the whole keli. They have to touch the keli. So if it became tummy b'tumas macing, sprinkling the waters, if it's considered a chibur, then it touched any part of any compartment. It's as if it touched all the compartments. Beautiful. And now, even the final Pedic of today, the help of God, Pedic Yudal of the Vilchas Kelim, we're going to learn more details of a klecheres, beginning with and repeating many times, Chevre, Halkov, the following. We learned above that if something is ba'oil hameis, something that's ba'oil hameis becomes tamei. But if you have a klecheres that has a summit puzzle, and if you also remember that Rambam made that kal v'chomer, it's not only klecheres. The Torah speaks about a klecheres in Parshas Chukas. Remember that kal v'chomer, that if a keli that could acquire tuma ma'aviroi, if it's sealed tightly, it's protected ba'oil hameis, for sure. Klei avonim, klei gelalim, klei adama, kelim that don't acquire tuma, not from the inside, not from the outside. If it's tightly sealed, everything in that keli does not acquire tumas oil. What about tumas klecheres? We learned in the previous chapter, we began learning the laws of klecheres, that if I have a klecheres and I put oichlin inside it, if the klecheres is tamei, all the food inside of it becomes tamei, even if it didn't touch it. But we also learned that a klecheres is not matama klecheres. But if there's food in the inner keli, then the food becomes tamei. Then we also learned that if there's liquid in the inner keli, since midrabanan liquids are matama kelim, then the inner keli will also become tamei, but from the liquids. What happens if I take a klecheres and I seal it tight and I put it inside the outer klecheres? So it's sealed. So we're going to learn the kal v'chomer that if the Torah says explicitly that a klecheres is matzel from tuma chamura, from oil, from maize, for sure, if I have a klecheres with foods in it and it's inside an outer klecheres that's tamei, not only the keli doesn't become tamei because en klecheres from tamei klecheres, but it's not matama the oichlin nor the mashkin because of the din of a tzamid pasel. We're going to learn more details about holes in a klecheres that's going to be mevatel its din of being a keli. We're going to learn what happens if there's liquids that are absorbed in a shard and you put that shard inside a klecheres, and many other details regarding tumas klecheres. Perek Arba'asa has 14 halachas, beginning with halacha. Kol hamatzel b'tzamid pasel b'oil hameis, like we explained. And the diuk of kol hamatzel, I think, is not only the klecheres, but also that kal v'chomer that we mentioned in the intro. Any keli that if you seal it tight, even though it's under an oil hameis, the contents will not become tamei. Also, matzel b'tzamid pasel b'oil klecheres. We learned in Pedic Yud Gimel that if I put a little klecheres inside a larger klecheres, as long as the rims of the inner one is not going protruding up, so it's inside of it, even though the keli doesn't become tamei, but the food in it is in it. If it's a tzamid pasul, nothing will become tamei. Why? That's a kal v'chomer. Im hitzel b'meisach chamur, because you have to have 7 days. You have to have the hazoya shlishi ushvi is dinu sheyatzel b'kleicheres hakal. However, v'kol she'eino matzel b'oil hameis, then eino matzel b'avir kleicheres. Yoval halacha beis shem she'ein tzamid pasul latuma b'oil hameis. Let's go in the opposite direction. What's the opposite direction? Remember, we learned this dinner. If there's oil under the mace and I have a klecheres, and let's say this is called samad pasul, which it is, so then all the food in there remains stored. Let me go in the opposite direction. If there is a kazayis mipsara mace inside the scale, first of all, you ruined your coffee. Why would you do that? But if it's here and it's under the oil, we don't say, since it's inside the tzamid pasul, no, soif tuma lotzes. Everything in the room is tummy. No, it's the summit puzzle prevents tumah from entering. It does not prevent tumah from exiting. The same thing now will be over here. Summit puzzle la tumah. It does not stop it from it imparting from the outside. In that direction, it does impart tumah. For example, and it's takasil tight, and you put it into a tanur, and the tanur is tamei in that direction. So then the kedera made out of cheres, and everything in it is taught. And even if it's mashkin, which mashkin then would have been metama de klei cheres, nothing in it became tummy because it's tightly sealed. But the opposite direction, if the tumah is inside of this kedera and it's sealed tight, and then you put it in the airspace of the tanur, then we disregard the sealing. No, because we say the sheretz is in the tanur. In the tanur. Nitma tanur v'chein chocha yotze b'zeh. Halacha gimel. Tabas temeya. That it's swallowed inside a brick. Remember Tuma Beluya, we're going to get there. And by the way, Tuma Beluya is not Matame if it's inside a living being. So we're going to see how it works over here. Or a Macha, that's Tame, that's inside a wood. And that falls into La'avir Klei Cheres. Okay? So the din is Nitma. Everything in the Klei Cheres is Tame. Now, there's a big chiddush here. Because you know what? A tummy tabas being inside a levena, you know what? It's not about tuma balua. Is that anything that only is makabel tuma through touch? Right? Let's say truma that touches the tabas will become tummy. If there is a tabas tameya inside a brick, and a bread of truma touches it, the bread won't become tummy because it didn't touch the tabas. But in the klei cheres, it's acquiring and imparting tumah is not about touch. It's inside the avir. That's the word. Because only direct touch will impart tumah. Here, there's like a chatzitza, but not when it comes to klei cheres. It's not about touch. Now let's go more. Where does tumah balua really work? That what, since it's swallowed in a living thing. The Rambam gives a great example. The Rambam Dafka picks a chicken, as I'll explain. The Rambam cannot pick an animal because when an animal dies, the animal itself is an avela. An avela is matame. You know what? What was unique about a bird, guys? Remember that even though nivlas oishtoid is matama, but it's only matama bebeis amliya. Because if you have a dead chicken, the carcass itself is not matami. But if the chicken, while it was alive, swallowed the sheretz, a dead sheretz, or b'sara meis, and here we did say that while the chicken is alive, that the tuma belua in it cannot impart tuma. And this chicken fell into the Avira Tanu. So first of all, when the chicken is alive, if the chicken died, now the chicken, see, that's why you're chicken. If it would have been an animal, forget about it, swallowed something. The carcass is metame, but nivlas oif toit is metame only bebeis habliya. The part is, since the chicken is dead, it's not protecting you from the tumah that's inside the chicken. Now, so we make the same kalvo chaymer, but beluyim b'meis is no longer protected. Beautiful. How do you view that? Something is in someone's mouth or inside folds in one's body. They're not considered to be nivlan in a living being. For example, an adam that had mashkin tameim inside his mouth, and don't make a mistake. If I have mashkin tameim inside my mouth, even though midrabanan I might become tamei if I drank enough of it, as we learned, the tumas gevia, here I'm not tamei. But the mashkin is tamei, but it's closed in my mouth. And then I stick my head inside the avid of a klei cheres. It's not summit puzzle. It's not protected. The mashkin is inside the keli. Timo, the chein taught, the other direction. That's eating oichlon mashkin, that food is in their mouth. And the tanur is already tamei. And as we learned in Pedik Yud Gimel, a tanur that's tamei imparts tuma to food and mashkin that enter its ear space. The food and mashkin are in my mouth. I stuck my head into the tanur tamei. Or the same thing in one's folds. Notice, we don't say that it's called belua b'toich hachai. It's not called belua. If the source of tumah is inside someone's folds, and that fold entered the tanur, again, it's not in the fold. It's not nivla. Nitma tanur. Afapi, that the tumah is only inside the kemet. If you have a sponge that absorbs mashkan tameim, even though the outside of the sponge is completely dry, it's not something possible. If that sponge falls into the avar klei cheres, then timo, because of the rules, a soif mashkel lotzeis, and v'chein chaticha shel lefes v'shel gemi. You're speaking about a piece of turnip or a piece of a reed. If they absorb tamei liquids, and the outside of the reed is dried, and you put it inside a klei cheres, that's not a tzamid pasul. The whole klei cheres becomes tamid. Charasim sharts shenishtamshu behem mashkin tameim, that was used prior for tamei liquids, and they absorb. In other words, in the shar menigvu, and now they are completely dried, and they fall out of klei cheres. Here we say loitimo gavaldik. In other words, liquids absorbed in a shard. I know for the dinim of kashrus, right? They got a problem. You can do hagala, but they are considered absorbed. Unlike when you have it absorbed in a turnip or in a reed, here it's better absorbed. But that's if there's no heat. Mamish like dini kashrus gavaldik. But nafol kanor, the moment it falls into an oven and you warm up the oven, nitma. Because through chaim, that's the whole problem with it being kashering klei cheres. Because we say seif mashkel, but says but the mashkin kalan means they don't have a high level of tuma, which is normally the case. It has a level of rishain. But by mashkin, you have mashkin, right? The secretions of a zav. Aval b'chamurim, like tamnida or her urine. In other words, mashkin that they themselves are tummy as an av, and they are absorbed in a shard. Im yechoylum lotzes. You would want at some point to get it expunged from, even though you can't get it fully expunged. Still, even if it's not hot, we're more machmer. But if you don't care that it's in it, if you have new olive dregs are the waste product of olives. After the olives were squeezed, and they come from olive oil that are tamei. In other words, the olives themselves are dry. Is there any remnants of liquids inside the olives? And you put it into an oven. And again, here it's properly absorbed, but with heat, it begins to be expelled. Nitma, shosef maskalotzes. Aval, if there's a point where you say that there's no liquid left. If it's old drag start, what's called old, after 12 months. After 12 months, we presume that there's no more liquid in it. Now, sometimes you can have olive gethys, olive dregs that had a lot of liquid to begin with, and you're living in Miami, it's very humid, things don't get properly evaporated, everything, all the moisture stays stuck in it. If you know it's still in there, it's different. If you know, no matter how old it is, that if you're going to warm it up, some liquid will ooze out, even after 3 years. It doesn't mean 3 years, it can mean 20 years. Even after a long time, nitma tana sheyusa, givaldi, kalach zayin. If you did something very unusual, you had a klecheres and you stuck a mechitza in it. You make it into 2 compartments and you make a proper mechitza all the way down to the ground, from the rim to karkiyasai, and the nichnas otuma ba'avar echa b'shnei chalakim. What you did is unusual. It's not considered a separated keli. Ditma klei kuloi. And therefore, let's apply this. If you have an oven and you divided it with boards, you divided it with curtains, and a sheretz is in one side of the oven, and you made a division because things here in one temperature, the other side another temperature. Very nice. Not for the nitumentara. Hakoil tami halacha 8. Kli shoyatun beteichai. And ichmesa keli la'aver klei cheres. And visvas hakeli atome, like we mentioned in the previous chapter, the inner kelis, the edges, and I don't even care what material the inner keli is made out of. As chutz, the klei cheres is going above it, even though the tuma is in it, because the tuma is in the bottom of the inner keli. The bottom of the inner keli is inside the outer keli. Doesn't matter toy. And what's the source? Because we say el toichoi and not toich toich. Halacha 9. If the outer one is already coming the other direction, and normally, what's the rule? That inside the klecheres will become tamei, and it's not somewhat puzzle, but the walls of the inner utensil are protruding above. They are taller, they're narrower. It fits in, but it's going above. Chutz leklecheres afapi shoichlin and mashkin are inside. Betech lecheres atamei the mechuvanim harel tohidim. Again, it says for example, kavedes, which is these large beehive-shaped containers that were normally very large. oy kupa, or a basket, or a pot, or a flask. And the shil shala kupa. Now we're going in the other direction. No, it's the tumah is inside the inner one, and you are lowering the inner one. The shil shala kupa la'avera chavius la'avera tanor. You're putting a kupa inside of it. Af al pi shasher it's muchav v'tei chavius. Hoyel usfas kupa yachemish shalamayla masfas chavius. Masfas tanor. It's not inside. The rim is not inside, so it's not inside. So then, harei lo tohaydim. Ve'im hoya b'toich hachemus or b'toich hakteida v'chayitim eichel mashkin. And the shil shall have again, because the rim of the inner keli is above the tanner, is above the klecheres. Nah, guys, we had this a little bit in halacha yud pedig yud gimel. What's the pshat? So if there is a hole that is mevatel toiras keli, so then ain't a matzilim. Ele im hoyo hasheretz letoichan, and the shil shall have klecheres hatohar. Since that kaveres, you can't say, well, the rims are protruding above. The whole keli lost its toiras keli. So now mitma. No, it goes in both directions. Also nitmu. Doesn't matter which direction. Now, how much of a hole is mavatal the keli? So here we go. If the hole is klei shetev is utensils that are made out of materials that can be toiveled. Right? In other words, we are excluding klecheres. Then the rim. Now, I know, guys. I know that we learned in Moitze Rimoin. Here we're speaking about a balabatish, a smaller keli. We learned already there. It's Moitze Zeisim. But if it's a klecheres, so it depends. If it was made loichalin kazeisim, if it was made lamashkin, koinas mashka. That's the koinas mashka we had a pedicure. Now, if it was made for both to be used for Eichlin and to be used for Mashkin, we're going to be Machmer. Meaning, it's not Matzal miyad Kleicheres. Now, what about fixing a cable? You have a hole. The hole now is Mavatl Tleidas cable. What happens if you saw some naked with tar? So we had this in chapter Yud Beis, right? The second half of Yud Beis today was about the Klei Zachochis, and the Rambam paskins that tar is not a good sealant for metal. But what about for Kleicheres? It's different. Now you sealed it. If the sheretz is inside this keli that's fixed, and you put it we're machmer nitma. Why? She'ein hatzamed masal alatum milatame. Because if the source of tuma is in it, since a tzamid puzzle doesn't prevent it from going out, this type of sealant will not prevent it. In other words, the food and the drink is in the keli that you fix with tar. And the tanur is tamei, and you would say, like we learned before, that if the walls of the inner keli are within the outer keli, the tumah of the outer keli affects the eichlin and the mashka. But the walls are going above. But it had a hole. But here you fixed the hole. All other kelim that are fixed with tar, in other words, let me say like this, that, we're speaking about being mesak and kelim. What's unique about klecheres here, lekula, is that zefes is considered a proper way to fix a klecheres. And all other kelim, even though we learned it today explicitly by glass, but all other kelim that have a hole, even though you plugged it up with zefes, with tar, it doesn't adhere to the keli like it does to a klecheres. It's not called fixed. Halacha yudalid, kaveres psucha, if you have this type of a container, you call it a beehive container, but it's not closed. Afapi that you close the hole with kash, with straw, because it's not called a keli. Halacha yud beis, hachemes, or a flask, or hakefisha, stone container that has an opening in it. And even though we learned clearly, still, harei elu matzilim miyad klei cheres. No, it's the halach is that we learned that if the inner keli, even though the walls are protruding above the outer keli, if it has a hole, that's all about a klei cheres. What about other types of containers? Gevaldik, shuhu. We don't say that since it's bottle, it no longer saves. When do we say that? If the hole that it has is above, not only the keli is, the inner one is going out, the pechas is above the outer walls. Now here you have to add the words afilu. even though it's as if it says vafilu sheyia beis hakibul shalahem mishul shalatech lecheres. Nevertheless, since the problem in the keli is above the walls of the outer keli, it's matzel everything in it. Wow. If you have a hide that doesn't have a receptacle, in other words, anything that's not called a keli because it has no base kibul, and that was put inside the ear space, or inside an oven, and there is a sheretz inside the oil, it's not protected. It's garnished. And you have oichlin and mashkin inside this hide that doesn't have a trade of a keli. Also tameim she'ein matzal miyad klei cheres ela kelim that have a toich like a sal or a kupa or a chemes. And the final halacha yudalit klei cheres shoysaton betoichai and ho yo klei cheres toid kofa yalapi klei cheres atame. So let's go back into the upside down kelim. You have a bottom keli and you flipped. You took another klei cheres. You turned it upside down, and one is resting on the other. Okay? In the beginning of Yudalo, the bottom one has a sheretz in it. The other klei cheres is tor. It's mamish on top. Kofi alpia klei. Or let's go in the other direction. Technically, how can that be? So you have a sheretz in the keli, but you put scotch tape. It's stuck in the walls of that keli, and you turned it upside down. So the sheretz is not falling out. That's the word. We want to know the status of the bottom keli. One is on top of the other. Because the devuk is just to make sure that it doesn't fall into the bottom one. Even though the ear spaces are ma'oidav, they're mamish touching, they're kissing one the other. Still, hatomi b'tumasei v'ator b'tarasei. Why? Which is exactly what we learned in Perek Yud Gimel. It has to be inside the avir. And therefore, if you have a chavis that's full of mashkin tohoiden, and it's put under the nechushtai shel tanur that we already interpreted, we explained in Perek Yud Gimel, and the sheretz falls inside the tanur, and we already said anything under the earth of the tanur is not in it. So then, harei chavis is a mashkin tohoiden, even though she'aver tanur mo'erev v'maver chavis. Chein ma'iseh chavis kfui al pi tanur u'pi al aver tanur. Even though the mashkin abisholei chavis hatoir, all of it will be the same. One doesn't affect at all the other. Gavaldik. God willing to be continued on Shabbat.